Nick Gilbert. He is a perfumer and evaluator and an absolutely fascinating individual, and we are pleased to have him as a guest. He will be joining Rachel and I. I just want to make sure we just got a word that I couldn't be heard. Okay, there we go. There was a little delay. I did have myself on mute at the very beginning. Rachel and I are going to be hosting him for a discussion. We're going to pick his brain. We're going to ask him some questions about his origins as a perfumer and a nose and an enthusiast of scent. So we're very excited to get things started here. So we're going to take a look at the chat. We have 5 people who are currently on the live stream. We have Philippe Alex, Scent of the Day, Scent I'll Blush by Tom Ford. And for anybody else who's currently tuned in, if you just want to join in the roll call in the message section. Also, just a reminder to hit the like if you haven't already done so. Let's try to aim for 40 likes for this live stream. And if anybody else wants to share their scent of the morning, afternoon, or evening, we would love to hear what you're wearing or even some thoughts on what you're wearing. And also feel free to ask any questions that you like in advance for Nick. I'll make sure that they're starred for review so that we can ask him those questions. And of course, during the stream itself. We have Heinrich here. Hello to you. And Montal Intense Cafe is his scent of choice. Six people who are tuned in at the moment. So we're going to wait a little bit until we have Rachel backstage and also our guest, Nick. And also a reminder of the Buy Me a Coffee option. We'll share that here. It's also pinned in the message section, in the chat section. 6 cups equals a sample pack. Each cup is $5. It does say US only, please, but I can make exceptions for Canada as well. But US and Canada only. And that is the direct link to my buymeacoffee.com site. And we have 8 people tuned in. We're going to let some more people file in, and we'll get things really rolling. Just a reminder that in 2 weeks, we're going to have Stephen Matthews. He will be our next guest, perfumer writer Stephen Matthews. And we will also be having Neil Chapman on May the 2nd, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just verify that here. I just want to make sure that I have the correct date. Got to look at the old calendar. I know that it will be taking place on a Thursday, that particular live stream, and it is in fact May the 2nd. Since Neil Chapman is in Japan, I will be hosting that live stream very early in the morning for Eastern Standard Time. It will begin at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, so just be aware if you are in the States, that will be a very early stream. So some of you may need to watch it archived, but it will be a great opportunity for those on the globe who that's a perfect time of day to tune in live. But yes, that will be 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, May 2nd. We will have Neil Chapman. Okay. And it looks like we have a bit of a situation just reported. Okay. So we may not have Rachel depending upon a scheduling conflict today. So she will keep us posted as to whether or not she'll be able to join us. But we hope that Nick will be on the backstage pretty soon. And I just got this notice just shortly before the live stream. So I'm just giving a quick response on that. Okay, we have a few other people who have chimed in the chat. We have Manginosis here. Hi to you. Scent of the day, Equipage Geranium by Hermes. It's a wonderful selection. And Philippe has a suggestion for occupying the time. Any news in the coming back of the discontinued mustache? Oh, the mustache, the fabled mustache of 2022. I actually was thinking about that the other day as to whether or not I should grow it back, but my partner is not a huge fan of it. And was relieved when I decided to move on from it. But hey, you never know. Maybe I'll do a pencil mustache. Maybe I'll do a different type of mustache rather than the handlebar that I had. We'll see. I kind of miss the whole grooming, and I had a little comb for it. I had my mustache wax. I liked taking good care of it, making sure the mustache whiskers were healthy. And we have Pat Lester here. Hello, JJ. Hello to you, Pat. Scent of the day, musk from Lorenzo Villaresi. A beautiful rosy musk, musky rose, powdery, comforting scent. And also rumored to be the signature scent for Brad Pitt at one time or another, if my memory serves me well. A beard stash. Do this. Yeah. I mean, I could grow out the beard more. I'm really fastidious about facial hair. I'll get really into it and then I just get tired of it and get rid of all of it. But that was a long run for that mustache. Actually, the last time that I had grown a mustache prior to that is when I was in a local production of what was called the Donkey Show, which was a Midsummer's Night Dream set to a 70s discotheque. And I actually performed as the DJ and played the role, an acting role with lines of the DJ. And my character, Amerigo Vespucci, actually had a mustache much like that. So I had that mustache back in 2012 to, yeah, it was 2012. And then when I decided I didn't want the mustache anymore because I moved to understudy, I ended up gluing a mustache on. And needless to say, it was inferior to the natural one that I had when I was in the full-time cast. 11 people tuned in. And I'm just going to check in and see if everything is going okay with our guest, Nick. And please, by all means, talk amongst yourselves. I kind of sound like Linda Richmond from Saturday Night Live. Talk amongst yourselves. I don't know if anybody will get that reference unless they were watching SNL in the 90s. Okay. Yeah, because I don't like too much dead air. Yeah. Oh goodness, there goes my there goes my screen. Now I can't see. I will be right back, folks. Just give me one moment. So I will give you a little explanation on what's going on with this laptop. I'll be with you in just a second, though. I am adjusting. Hey, this is fun. Okay. So we'll get into some technical stuff here. So I am actually getting a new laptop. This is a very old laptop. And what's happening is the display is starting to go out. And there's a certain name. I'm sure some tech heads are going to be familiar with this. But what enables the screen to illuminate on a laptop is starting to die off. This is a very old laptop. I got this actually in 2017. I know, right? I'm really stubborn about letting go of technology until I have squeezed every ounce out of it. So I did make a note to myself as to what this type of technical issue is, and it has something to do with, when you have a yes, live bloopers. Yeah, bloopers indeed. I'm trying to find the email though, where I wanted to share with I wanted to sort of save the information so that if I had an emergency issue with this laptop, I could refer to what was going on. And I can't find the email that I sent to myself. Give me a second. I'm insistent on. Oh, fail. Here we go. Here we go. It is a failing LVDS cable or backlight power cable. It has begun to fail. So this is so bad. So my laptop is so old that this stuff is failing. So it's come to the point where I have to open the laptop the monitor very slowly, the monitor part very slowly. And if I open it too quickly and it gets beyond like a 45-degree angle, I will lose the image entirely. And it is getting steadily worse. So mine is almost at 90 degrees. I hope it doesn't happen again. But that time was the first time that it just spontaneously disappeared, which means my screen went black. So what I had to essentially do is close the monitor and then slowly reopen it just to make sure that I retain the backlight power so it wouldn't go back out again. Fascinating stuff. Riveting. This is not what you signed up for when tuning in here. I actually am going to see if our guest is doing okay. We're 15 minutes in, and I do not yet see him in the backstage in the green room. So I'm going to see if we can figure out if everything is okay on his end. And just bear with me. We have 14 people tuned in. We are just making sure that our guest is doing okay. And I just sent an email and a message to him, just checking in. Are you curious to smell the Guerlain Estrées? Got a sample kit last week after a meetup with Mr. Vasser. A meetup? You got to tell us about that as well. The Estrées. Which Estrées? Which ones are actually currently in production? You gotta inform me. I honestly can't even keep up with the perfume news. I'm just learned that there was a new release, courtesy of Persolaise of Hermes Paddock. I had no idea about that. So I'm not. I'm. Not, my finger is not on the pulse of what's happening in the perfume world lately. I've been juggling a lot of stuff. So tell me a little bit more about this. I mean, are these just the Estrées of the classics? Yeah, tell us a little bit more about that, and also about your meeting with Terry Wasser. Rose and bergamot are the more interesting to me. Oh, I don't even. I am completely out of the loop on this. Philippe, I'm going to rely on you to save this stream and tell us a little bit more about this. Just give us some more details in the chat. 12 people who are tuned in at the moment. We are awaiting our guest, Nick Gilbert. Rachel may or may not be able to join us due to a last minute scheduling conflict with her work. So hopefully she can, but if not, in the least, hopefully we'll have our guest and we can have a great conversation with him. Recently launched the Guerlain notes deconstructed into single notes. Whoa. I was not aware of this at all. I would be quite curious, actually. They're going to have a pretty amazing to top vol de nuit and some Saura Parfum for those Astray. Yeah. The Astray that I have in my possession is Chamad, a Chamad from, I believe, the late 70s or early 80s. I have a Vol de Nuit, which is a more recent version, which, in comparison to an older Parfum, not too bad. If Terry Wasser actually had some involvement in that Astray, he did an excellent job at preserving the integrity of it. So I got involved. I got invited via the Guerlain booth manager to meet Terry Wasser during his Geneva visit. Oh, how envious am I? Apparently, he won't deal with mass releases, only sourcing and bespoke. Very interesting. I'll happily help make this lively. Well, just in time, Philippe, because we actually do have our special guest in the green room backstage. And without further ado, let's introduce Nick Gilbert. We're going to have a great conversation. Hello.
Hi, apologies. I got so confused because of the time zone changes and
oh God. Don't talk about it.
I'm so sorry. I thought I still had like 45 minutes.
Well, honestly, I thought I flubbed up because I've done that before. There was actually one instance where I had misunderstood a guest's request and I flipped it around so that the time that he suggested was his own time and I was using it as my time. Long story short, the good news was that we didn't miss the time that he requested, but I got online to start the stream and it actually needed to be 6 or 7 hours later.
Oh gosh. So gosh.
So these things happen. These things happen.
I'm so sorry. I just went 3 p.m. Oh yeah, that's 8. And then I forgot that the time zones because you guys have sprung forward before us, I think.
Yeah, and I don't factor that either. We are crazy. Spring forward, fall back. Exactly. Oh. But I'm glad that you could join us, and this is great. This is going to be a good time. Rachel unfortunately had a conflict with her schedule. I think you might have read the email.
Yes,
so hopefully, cross our fingers, she can join us at some point. Because unlike myself. I'm going to blush. I'm going to be a little embarrassed. I haven't smelled any Boujee Bougies, so I can't say anything. But I wanted to carve out a time for especially for her, for the two of you to talk about it, because I would just sit here and I'm sure it's great. I am sure that they're great, but I still have to get my nose on them.
Well, we can sort something out. We can send them to you in the post at some point.
Oh, that'd be lovely, lovely. Okay, so let's get started. I love to ask the same questions for any of my perfumer guests because I want to know their origins. I want to know where they got to where they are today, and we go all the way back to their youth, to their childhood. So. Can you recall some of the earliest scent memories that stuck with you throughout your lifetime?
Yeah. So
one of my good, the bad, and the ugly. They can be the scent.
One of my very earliest scent memories is not particularly pleasant, I don't think. But my nan, my grandmother, my mum's mum, had a Nissan Datsun, this old this tiny car, and there was the sunroof, I think, never quite fully closed, so it always smelled damp. And there was this particular sort of the foam of the seats, the smell of cigarettes, because she smoked quite a lot. And the kind of like damp of the car, and that really sticks in my mind as one of my earliest scent memories. Like I can remember being, I think, 5 or 6, and that just being, that smell is still crystal clear in my nose as I talk about it now. It's so bizarre.
And that's what started it all for you.
And that kicked it
first
off,
inspiration. Really. And please tell me one of the Boujee Bougies has that accord.
Oh yes. Well, there is a kind of a sort of tobacco nostalgia in Queer.
I like that.
But then other sort of similar memories are things, well, not similar, but the kind of more traditional ones are actually kind of like going into the department store with my mom and trying to scrounge free samples from Chanel for her. Just going up as these cute little kids being like, hi, have you got any samples of cocoa? And getting a little goodie bag off the woman working on the counter so I could take them to my mum. And the smell of those department stores back then in the sort of late 80s, early 90s was pretty magnificent because everything was so just voluminous and loud and spicy or tuberosy.
Oh,
and
lots of tuberose. Oh my
yeah,
God.
like I can really strongly remember Giorgio Beverly Hills just being everywhere and just those kind of like yellow and white paneled bottles everywhere.
Yes.
And then one of my dad's friends' wives wore it, so I always think it smells like Pam. Every time I smell it now, I'm like, oh, Pam.
Yeah.
And then so, not every time. Well, not every time. I don't smell it very often anymore. But every time I do smell it, I'll pick it up every time I go in a shop that's got it, just to get my nose on it again, because I kind of really, really remember that. And then blackberry picking as well. There was like a lane behind my grandparents' house, a lane that led down to kind of like a farm. That was there. There were horses, there were goats. So kind of like goat smell in the background, but picking blackberries in the lane, so like green and then very sort of fruity, jammy fingers.
I like a good jammy fingers. I had jammy fingers when I was a kid. That explains a lot. So I had in my neighborhood, my mother and I, I grew up near cranberry bogs because I'm from New England, and we had cranberry bogs, but also on the perimeter of the cranberry bogs grew blueberries and raspberries and black raspberries and blackberries, 3 different berries. And we would pick those and take them home. So I have a very similar memory to that. Sans goats. We didn't have goats, but there were lots of frogs, though. They didn't give an odor, but there were lots of them because these tiny little frogs loved living in the cranberry bogs. And this small, like tiny frogs. And they were so active. You could just put your hand out and they would jump in your hand.
Just like a handful of frog.
Yeah. So you had to be careful not to pop a frog instead of a raspberry.
Oh gosh, the frog spawn. Well, frog spawn has a really particular smell as well, actually.
It does. Well, you know what? Not to go off on a tangent, I watched Super Deka. He was describing Jean Patou Joy and the Indoles, and he described them as reminiscent of barnacles. And for some reason, I just got it. Because I know playing in the low tides as a child, and those barnacles and everything around them, I got what he was saying when he said that. But
that's really interesting.
Because during description,
one of my A-levels was biology, and we had a field trip to Wales where we did some field work for a week. And one of the things that we did was literally sit and count barnacles. But I don't have like a odor memory of the barnacles in particular, but maybe there's like a kind of like salinated, slightly maybe
it could be a fantasy note. It's a fantasy note of low tide, because that's when you see all the barnacles.
I can get into low tide.
Are those scents really coming from the barnacles or from the mussels, the limpets, or just the decaying vegetation? The
rock pools themselves,
the
seaweed, all of that.
The starfish that are dehydrating under the sun.
There was no sun in Wales that time.
I also love how tangential this conversation had just become from a formal interview format. But I also love the fragrances that are released that have these fantasy notes, and one of them would be of starfish. And I would just think to myself, did they not collect starfish as children and take them home to dry? It's a god awful smell.
It was not a good smell. Yeah.
Sand dollars, on the other hand, they didn't give off as much of a malodorous grossness, but the sea stars, the starfish would. So you have these childhood memories. Is there a way for you to link some of these childhood memories into later on where you started to become more fascinated with perfume? Now, you already mentioned the department store counter.
Yeah.
Let's get into that a little bit more. Now let's look at the timeline from your youth into your adulthood, where you were getting into scent, getting into perfume.
Well, I got into scent by selling it. So I got a weekend job at Boots the Chemist, which is like a big chemist chain in the UK, and they were at that point in time the market leader for fragrance in the UK. So we had really big and big selections of fragrance that we sold in those stores, with lots of lots of customers that would be coming in. So anyway, I got this weekend job at Boots, and I was working on the tills as a sort of checkout boy. And after a few months, they were like, "Oh, we really like you. Is there anything that you want to do in the store in particular?" And there was a girl that worked on the counter that I really had good fun with on my lunch breaks. And I was like, "Oh, I want to work on perfume." Not because I was particularly drawn to it, because I thought it'd be really good fun to play and hang out with Teresa. And then really quickly I had this kind of realization that I could speak about it, and the other people that worked there were sort of struggling. So it wasn't kind of like an immediate, oh, this is the thing that I'm going to do with my life. Like absolutely that wasn't the thing. But there was a particular manager, account manager for the counter, called Anna. She was a chemist, and she kind of had like a little bit of an understanding of how perfumery sort of worked, and the fact that there were aromatic chemicals and all of these things. So she kind of like explained that to me. And I was interested, but I was very sort of like tunnel vision about my approach of what I was going to go and be doing anyway. Like I was going to uni, it was all going to be different. I was going to go and study psychology and work in rehabilitation with addicts in prison, stuff like that. Like that was very much my trajectory. So I wasn't sort of paying a vast amount of attention to it. But like during that time, like Alexander McQueen Kingdom launched, Yves Saint Laurent M7, and I was starting to kind of think like, wow, these are really out there. Like they don't smell like anything else that we've got on our counter. And it kind of started to fascinate me a little bit. So Anna had told me about Base Notes as a website that exists and that I should go and sort of fall into.
Oh no.
Oh, my signal dropped.
I hear you now. It was a freeze frame for a while. It was a nice freeze. It was a nice look. It was
that's good. I just had spinning wheels of death, and I was like, "Oh no!"
Yeah, you looked contemplative. The mouth was closed, which is nice.
That's handy.
Yes. You weren't in mid sentence. It was sort of like it was a pregnant pause between thoughts.
So she told me about Base Notes, and then it spiraled out of control a little bit because I started sort of reading about these different stores that you could buy samples from, because at the time in the UK there weren't really any sort of specialist perfumeries apart from Les Senteurs. So I was reading the descriptions on that website, just completely enthralled and just obsessed with everything. And then I think it was about the time Dior Homme had been launched, and then Infusion d'Iris by Prada.
Right.
And I was like, oh, I like both of these, but there's something in common, and I didn't sort of like understand what it was. And then the more I kind of read and looked through the training materials and then started reading online, I was like, oh, iris must be a thing that I'm into. So I'm going to find and buy all of the iris samples that I can buy from Les Senteurs. And that was kind of the real, we've got the bug situation, where I was like, okay, I'm really I really like this actually. And at the same time, I was sort of finishing up uni. I was actually deciding maybe I don't want to go into this career path that I thought I was so like sure I was going to do. I didn't think so much because, you know, people with addiction issues tend to be criminalized.
Yeah.
That whole situation you don't get out of, and so on. So I was like, well, this perfume thing's nice. Maybe I'll just have a go at that for a while. So I just continued sort of selling it and account managing, and then I got into training.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of moved from training to writing a few articles for Base Notes.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote a few pieces, and that led to Les Senteurs actually asking Grant if they could have my email address to get in touch with me, because they needed someone who could speak about and write about fragrance, because the person who'd written all the descriptions for their website, James Craven, was not retiring, but he needed to step back and take less time because he was looking after his he was looking after a family member at the time, and he needed to sort of step back. And they needed someone that had that kind of like passion, knowledge, and ability to write about and talk about fragrance. So they got in touch with me, and I went for an interview. And at the same time, I was contacted by Penhaligon's to go for an interview, and also Harvey Nichols and Harrod. And I was like, oh, this is weird. Because I'd not approached anyone. I was just like, what's happening? So who knows what happened? There was just something in the ether. And then I came down to London for a couple of interviews and basically decided I'm going to go to work at Les Senteurs. I think it's a really good idea. Just because as a place, they had all these different brands. They had perfumer founded brands. They had, you know, Frederic Malle. They had Perfumery Générale, so Pierre Guillaume's brand.
Yes.
Pierre Guillaume, though. They were the only retailer for Tower. You know, all of these things. So I then really fortunately got to meet a lot of the brand founders, a lot of the perfumers, and sort of build up knowledge from them. And I was just like, this is heaven, this is wonderful. But obviously it was a family business, and there's kind of nowhere you can go past a certain point, right? So I was doing things like working on product descriptions, managing the website, opening and managing a second store, making buying decisions for like which new brands we're going to take in, working on fragrance development project that we kind of decided to do, all of these kind of things. But then I was basically like, well, there's no up here, because the up is to be the owners.
Right.
And I'm not going to be the owners because it's a family, the Hawksey family, and they're wonderful. And Claire, if she's watching, I doubt it, but it's like she's probably busy smoking a joint.
Reach out to her and get her interested in the channel.
Yeah. I'll drop her a line and say, hey, I picked you up. You should absolutely watch this. She was wonderful, sort of like former actress, completely chaotic person, but in the best way. I loved her. So she was kind of like big champion of me there. That was really nice. But then I kind of, it all sort of kept moving along, and it's like, well, I'm not going to replace Claire. I can't replace her. She's the daughter of the founder. That's not going to happen. And then as I was kind of having these like, well, I don't really know if there's anywhere else anything much more I can do in this role, I was contacted then by Penhaligon's again, who needed someone for marketing and working alongside the product fragrance development team as the kind of fragrance expert of the marketing team. So that's what I did. Got approached by them, and they gave me a job, and I worked on loads of things for Penhaligon's. Like, the list was quite absurd, really. If I think about what I ended up doing there, it was sort of.
Were they having you write ad copy and a lot of the marketing and right.
So ad copy, the marketing. So that involved. It's so broad. I managed like the Instagram and the Facebook pages and the Twitter feed. I did marketing copy for emails if they needed it, blog posts, all of the new press releases and launches and descriptions for the website. I did store window displays. I organized things like Uber factice labels and store signage, and then training, because I just happened to have a training background and they needed someone who understood what retail staff need and could talk to. And then I was working on fragrance development, so on new projects.
You putting all those boots skill sets to good use. Yes,
absolutely. Like I built all these skills, why not use them? And there was a period in time at Penhaligon's when it was like the brand was growing, but the teams hadn't caught up to where the brand was. So we were like, in terms of available staff, so we were really doing everything in that marketing team, like absolutely everywhere and everything all at once. And yeah, working on the fragrance development, which was amazing because obviously Bertrand Duchefort was almost like an in-house perfumer for us. So I got to sort of like pick his brain a lot and spend a lot of time talking to him. And then
that's great,
because also it was, I mean, it still is, L'Artisan and Penhaligon's were sister companies, and they also had Stephanie Bacouche as an in-house. Well, she was kind of doing in-house regulatory at L'Artisan. She wasn't necessarily just doing perfumery at that point on its own.
Olivia Jacobetti as well worked.
She was kind of outside of it, but she did a lot of fragrances for L'Artisan and Penhaligon's.
Couple Elixir is the one that I recall she did. That was fantastic. Yeah.
It's a fantastic fragrance. I mean, I was obsessed with it. I was obsessed with Elixir because I just loved frankincense and still do.
It's a good reference for that too, and the way that she uses it and such. That's just. It's so sheer, though. I love it. It's not like a dense incense. It's sort of like really the idea of incense from a distance that I love, where it's just sort of a sillage. It's sort of.
That's really interesting that you say that because that's how I think of her perfumery quite often. Yeah. It's kind of like that thing, but from a distance.
Yeah.
Like En Passant is absolutely like a lilac over there.
It's
and
over there.
The D'Orsay, I don't know what that's called now because they've relaunched and put it somewhere else in the brand.
Linden Blossom one.
The Linden Blossom one, which is fabulous. It really smells convincingly of Linden Blossom. But over there.
Over there. It is, it's a peripheral.
Yeah.
It's the periphery, which has its own character.
Yeah.
It's like you can't. The idea of approaching it like that to me, it's almost more compelling because it's just sort of like on the precipice, but it's not smacking you in the face. It's sort of like, I'm over here. Yeah. And it also makes it a little bit more seductive too, because if you're wearing it, a lot of those, of course we're in the age where people are talking about performance metrics and I don't like those conversations, but but for this kind of thing, it's about just sort of the ambience. It's sort of like, you have ambient music and then you have ambient fragrance, and it's no less substantial. It's just
exactly
feel. Yeah.
Because one of the like main thing, because I obviously used to sell when I was at Les Somptueux, I used to sell Frederic Malle, so En Passant was one of the ones we sold. And it had like a real fan base amongst the local customers, but then the perfume lover customers quite often came in and complained that it didn't last very long, it didn't have much performance. And I'm like, but the beauty of it is that it's transient and fleeting and so evocative in that time. Like that's the beauty of it. Not everything needs to shout off your skin for 24 hours.
The whole premise of scent is in its ephemeral nature. Anything that's going to prolong itself, there are all these different things that are happening neurologically that are going to prevent you from getting those. It's always going to be the rewards diminish no matter what. If you're going to have a development curve that's steep, you might actually find it more rewarding than if the perfumer makes an effort to make it ever so gradual, because the perfumer ends up employing certain things that may approximate the experience, but I think that a lot of us in our scent perception will know after a while it is not like what first hits us, the first 20 minutes to hour,
No, exactly. It just
yeah, yeah,
can't be from for a whole bunch of, like, the physics of perfumery means it
yeah.
can't be. Yeah.
And that being said, I don't find en passant to be all that poor performing at all. Like
Well,
I think it's a subjective thing, but
yeah, I think,
yeah,
like, it's really 3 hours of solid presence and then
yeah,
very sort of, like, quiet, musky trail,
yeah, yeah,
which I think that people mistake that muskiness because maybe they're in Oswink to the musky sort of character,
yeah.
and they're mistaking that as it's gone. But yeah, I think it's 3 hours of really beautifully I'm a lilac over there.
Over there.
And then it's shifted a little.
Over
Just
there.
just
Just a little ways.
yeah,
In the Arboretum.
exactly.
I purchased a 30 ml bottle. I realized that Frederick Mall had started to release the smaller quantities, and I finally have a quantity in my possession. I long appreciated it, but I think initially I was one of those who, I'm not in that space now, but early on in my perfume enthusiasm journey, I cared much more about the performance. And I felt like, well, is it really worth it? But now I felt like it was worth it, and they offered the perfect quantity for me, which is great. And I will be doing a review of it. I'm going to actually do a week of lilac fragrances at the end of April, early May, so it will appear.
Ooh, I want to ask you everything that you're going to talk about, but obviously that's going to give it away.
I can give some hints.
Okay, hang on, because I need to talk about a lilac perfume. I don't know if they even still make it.
We'll see if it's on the list. Go ahead.
They have Jasmine Lilac, so lilac jasmine.
Wait. Jean-Charles Brosseau?
Yeah. Like Ombre Rose people.
Ombre Rose, yeah. I have a lovely violet one.
Yeah.
That one's
They have a really fabulous lilac that's always stuck in my memory. That Jasmine Lilac is
Jasmine Lilac.
It's worth sniffing if you've not sniffed it. Like, really, I was completely obsessed. I used to sort of, that was a Les Senteurs days one where I absolutely was just like,
I think
people
that
would
might
come in and talk like en passant, and I'd be like, well, if you want one that lasts longer, get
it lasts longer, right? I think that was around the same time as the violet one, which I find quite intriguing because it's very aqueous. It's very like water.
Yeah, I remember
minty that too. I love it.
Strange minty watery violet.
Love violet is another one of my favorite notes. I like anything that's green, purple, and blue. All the green, purple, and blue notes I'm quite fond of. I can give hints if I can recall at this time of the day. One of them is a more recent release, and it is a designer release. So there's one of them, and then. Oh, it's awful. I can't even think of it.
I can't even remember what I'm talking about.
Right. What are we talking about now? Something in the distance. Over there. I can't, for the life of me, I can't think of what the other life. Wait, I have my phone. My phone is my new brain. That's right.
Yeah. I have to outsource.
My phone is my new brain.
Yeah.
I don't know anything until I open this. But one of them will be en passant, and then going ahead here. But I'm not going to give the names. I'm going to kind of give like some clues to see if you can guess.
Yeah.
That's last year's. Last year around this time, I did Mimosa, which is another lovely note. Okay, here we are. Oh, yes. Another one is from a house that uses a little stand for scent strips. That's my clue. A little mouillette stand. It looks like
that. In their logo?
Yes. And my good friend John Beeble actually recommended that one to me. And that one is actually supposed to evoke white lilacs and white wisteria.
I love wisteria.
Me too. Another one is a discontinued diptyque. A long discontinued diptyque.
I didn't know they had a line.
And then there is another one that is the curveball. It is the really left field one that people may not expect as lilac focused by Comme des Garçons. So yeah. So there are my clues. That's going to be at the end of April. So yes, that's right. I think I was doing an interview with you. Let's see. What was my next? This isn't you're not interviewing me right now.
No.
What sparked your, and no, we already did that one. Okay.
Yeah.
Looking at my notes. Oh, some of your favorite fragrances.
Oh, okay. So, well, I mean, I love incense, so I do love elixir. And then one of ours, basically, I don't want to be like, oh, hard sell, plug. But Gilded, which Pia's created for our brands, Boujee Bougies, is frankly exquisite. Like, I'm obsessed with it. It's a iris in 3/4, not iris, incense in 3 forms. Iris back in my brain.
Another eye. You're close.
With aldehydes and this wonderful sort of like golden metallics.
Yeah.
Sparse airiness, lightness, saffron, and then this just wonderful dry down. I'm completely obsessed with that. Amber Chromatique by Maison Crivelli. I'm really obsessed with. It's a really novel and interesting use of ambretolide, which is Moscow particularly drawn to. Mostly because it's one of the ones I can smell.
Fair enough.
I know my anosmias really well because we have sort of like the musk shelf in the lab, and I can go and not smell the ones that I can not smell. So I'm really aware of my anosmias, but I do like ambretolide, and that's really fascinating as well. That's again a kind of like amber type, but with this. The muskiness makes it really sexy.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a modern Ambrox ambergris type.
Okay.
But with like quite classic like golden amber, the amber accord vibe at the same time. And it's somehow really well balanced in between those two concepts.
Oh, cool.
I'm really into that. Prada Infusion d'Iris, it's a kind of, if I want to smell clean, I'm going to meet some, like, I don't know, going to a meeting or seeing some clients, or I just want to smell fresh for whatever reason, I'll chuck that on because it smells like starch white shirts. Like, it, not that I ever starch and iron shirts. One, I don't like wearing collared shirts. I don't know, it's too formal for me. But I do love the smell of kind of like starched iron shirts. And it's just got this wonderful, like, there's also this benzoin sort of sweet powderiness that's happening in there.
Yeah, right. That could contribute to it too.
And I just love that. I really love that.
Nice.
And I'm just looking at my sort of like the things there and then realizing there's 3 things I can't even talk about yet.
Well, we could have an Effluvium exclusive.
No, we couldn't. I'll be flayed for NDAs.
Oh, I understand. Yes.
Yeah.
That Crivelli sounds good. Actually, so far, all the Crivelli that I've sampled have been nice, but they didn't quite resonate enough with me or stand out to me to say, you know what, I'm going to continue my insanity and add it to my collection.
Yeah.
However, the one that you described sounds like it might be the one to try.
Have you smelled the Osmanthus from him?
That one's quite nice, but
I really love that.
I have a tough time with Osmanthus. Not the note. I loved like the actual flower, but I think it wasn't even, you know what, to be honest, it wasn't even so much that I thought it was very nice, but I thought to myself, do I really need a 5th Osmanthus?
Yes. What kind of?
Well, then that's going to be 1006. No, but that one was very nice. But there were a few others where I felt like conceptually it was solid, but you know. The ambre, you said it was chromatique?
Amber Chromatique.
Comati. Okay, I'll try it. I'll
Yeah,
give it a try. I felt like there has to be one from the house where it's just going to be undeniable. But then I have to make sure my one in one out policy that I get rid of something else.
you've got to get something out.
Get something
Yeah,
out because it's getting ridiculous.
yeah. I mean,
Collecting.
my collection was crazy because having worked for years in
Yeah.
this trade, I was getting a lot of stuff from the jobs, from like training days and all of those kind of things. And then every single thing that we launched, I had a bottle of
Hmm.
from when I was a pen. And then I was doing sort of like writing about fragrance quite a lot, and sort of the old podcast that I used to do with Thomas, FumeChat.
Yes.
So we were getting a lot of samples through that, and then there was the old Love to Smell channel that me and Pia had. So I was getting kind of a fair amount of stuff coming to me,
Hmm.
and I got to a point where I was like, this is all here, but I'm not smelling or wearing any of it.
Yeah.
What am I doing? And I basically did a big come and take perfumes, please, friends.
It's getting to that point for me.
Say,
Yeah.
and edited it down to about 20. And
Wow.
now it's creeped back up because
Okay.
crept back up rather. I can't help myself, obviously.
Yeah.
This is a problem.
It can be a problem. I mean, we could do a whole other discussion on that, but I'm sure I'll
Yes.
lose. My viewers will hemorrhage if we start getting into
Yeah.
that. um, but yeah. Here we are in a tangent again. I love tangents. How about another question for you?
Okay.
Let's get back into your profession. That's right. You're a
Okay. Yeah.
perfumer.
Let's do that.
That's right. What do you find are the biggest challenges that you face as a perfumer?
So I want to clarify. I personally not a perfumer.
You are not a perfume. Wait,
I'm
are
not a
you
perfumer.
just an evaluator then? Wait,
Just yes.
are you just are you just a lowly evaluator? Are you you're a
Yeah.
peasant to the
So
perfume?
I think of myself kind of as evaluator slash creative director.
Ah, so
Pia is the perfumer.
so why was I thinking that? I feel like I just thought you had all so it's really Pia who is doing much of the compounding and formulation
She's
and
doing the formulation. We've got an assistant who does the compounding.
who
So I
assistant
can,
who does the compounding. Okay.
yeah. So, but depending on kind of the project and stuff, I might have to step in and do some because we've got like extra timeline. Because I learned how to compound years ago. Just it happened,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so I know I kind of understood, and I can train people in fact how to compound. But Pia will also compound from time. It depends on the project, but the actual day to day, yeah, I'm certainly not a perfumer. I don't claim to be. I never wanted to be as well. That's the other
Mm.
thing.
You must be
I
really impressed with my journalistic skills.
no, it's, it's kind of. I mean, I get it a lot.
I just
Actually,
thought
people
that you
just assume that I'm a perfumer, and
yeah.
also that I must want to be. But
And I
I've never.
definitely think that being an evaluator has a lot of value. Oh, not to be redundant, but a lot of value to it.
Yeah,
And I've actually, I've studied perfume, but I've seen myself in more of a practical sense, wanting to be an evaluator than
yeah,
a perfumer for reasons that I could
yeah,
get into, but I choose not
yeah.
to. But I would love to do something similar to that. So now that I have got my facts straight, got to get your facts straight when you're in this position. What do you find is most challenging in that with that kind of role, evaluating?
Um, I think it's trying to remain objective about a brief that's not ours.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I think it's very, very tempting to start to impose your taste on things. And for sure, that might happen if I didn't step in and say, don't do that. Pia might start doing things more to her taste, and then we have to kind of backtrack a little bit.
Mm.
And for sure, it's happened in the past, and I think that's one of the most challenging things is making sure that I feel like when we're talking about this project, where it is that we're creating for somebody else, we're in that world, and this creation has to speak to and be relevant to that world that brand or founder has created. And so that's kind of, I think, one of the most challenging things is making sure we really stay in that space in the development process. And of course, things like communication, like that's always a challenge. Like ensuring you're on the same page as another person. When they say green, do you mean the same green that I mean? When, you know, like they could say green and mean cut grass or mango skin or crushed leaves,
herbal green, galbanum green.
Like, there's so many different things. And when they say I want it more green, you're like, okay, in which way? You know, it's like, it's kind of, I think you've got to really spend a lot of time ensuring that we therefore are on the right path and on the right page and on the right sort of frame of communication and understanding with the other people. And especially like there'll be times where someone will say that they want something and it turns out they want the opposite of what they've said, because they think that they're saying the right words to get what they're looking for. And it happens, and it's a challenge to then make sure that we figure out actually what is the right way to talk about it and talk about things together so that we can understand what you're on about. Like there was a project we were doing at the beginning of the pandemic, so God, ages ago. And then the guy was like, I don't like the sweaty smell that's in this. And I'm like, I don't know what on earth you're talking about. It smells like sweat to me.
Right.
And then it took us like, he had to get me some samples of some other things and so on, just so I could really get the reference that he was coming at. Because both of us were going, what? But actually, once he'd explained what he meant and I'd smelled a couple of other things, I totally recognized where he was coming from and what he was attributing as sweatiness. And then we could avoid putting that into the submissions ever again, because we'd realized what materials were creating that effect and so on, and what combinations were creating that effect. So
are you at liberty to disclose what those things were that were perceived as sweaty?
If I'm really honest, it was 4 years ago and it's gone out of my brain.
You don't recall?
It was, so all I'll say is it was a tobacco fragrance, which had a sort of like honey facet. And I think that it was actually some of the sort of like honey materials that were creating that impression. So, but I'm pulling that from the very back of my mind because we worked on it so long ago. It's hard to kind of keep those things at the forefront because I'm not formulating, so I don't need to retain that.
Right. Yeah. All the minutia that is involved in creating.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I think people. I know my materials pretty well, but I don't need to know them to a level that a perfumer needs to know them, and all of those kind of things. And the last thing I ever really want to do as well is be like, you should use this raw material to the perfumer because they're like, I don't think. So it's more like suggesting an effect or impression that you want to get across or something like that.
It's a really interesting role that you have because what you're doing is you're facilitating those who are presenting to you a brief within the limitations of perfume or scent language and vocabulary, because, you know, of no fault of ours, it's just the way that things have come to be that we have very little in the way of describing what we smell. So we try to put together what makes sense to us. And the average person who hasn't studied perfume is probably going to convey it in a way that needs to be, for lack of avoiding a pun, distilled. You distill it in a way to make it make sense to the perfumer. So what you're taking is what they want, and you're sort of piecing it together and understanding what they want, and then we get the final product from the perfumer based on that. So that is a very important role, and and I imagine it can be challenging, but a rewarding challenge and enlightening for all parties involved. We actually had somebody who was quite pleased to see us here. What a lovely surprise! Yes, she's quite a lovely lady as well. Didn't know there was a live tonight. We always do this halfway into the stream. We're gonna do a brief intermission, and the two of us will be right back. Hi, welcome back. I hope everybody was able to take a little break in the powder room. Did you have the opportunity to powder your nose? Lovely to see that our viewership went from 20 to 12 in a matter of 10 seconds. That's great. Okay, let's bring.
That video was I was cackling away to myself.
Well, this is the thing. I have a good memory for certain things. I can't remember any of the lilac fragrances that I want to write about, but I certainly remember that you found it the appreciation for things like that, and that stuck with me. So I thought it would be a good little prank to have that as an intermission. Trust me, that's not our typical intermission. That's not one that I have lined up for every one of our live streams. That was especially for us to enjoy.
Well, I enjoyed it,
and it's quite relevant to perfume if you really think about it.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, who doesn't love the smell of?
I subtly went for a number two, very subtly. Oh, hi. Well, if you have just peace out to Mayo, man. I don't know if this gentleman was here for the intermission, but it's just the juxtaposition with the peace out. I think next time I use that, I'm just going to have a little video of me peacing out at the end.
Yes, well, deuces.
Deuces. Okay. All right. Oh, God. My asthma is going to start kicking in. Jesus.
I'm so sorry.
No, you don't apologize. My God. Yeah, I have adult onset asthma, and I was kidding. And I was diagnosed last year, and the first thing I thought was like, is this from all the perfume that I've been smelling all these years? And I talked to the pulmonary, and she was like, no, there's no evidence to suggest that. So I think it was just some genetic thing that I'm fortunate enough to have. But let's get back to our discussion here. We have 11 people tuned in. So I want to talk a little bit about Olfiction. I want you to introduce to our audience its origins, what its mission is. Give us the background on that and tell us what Olfiction is all about.
So, I mean, Olfiction, obviously, the name is a pun.
Right.
Olfaction, fiction, storytelling through scent is kind of where we were sort of coming from and going with it. And we started, I'm looking at the clock for the date, almost 8 years ago now. So it's Pia Long and I, and we've during that time had some of the people working with us and so on. So Thomas Dunckley, who is the Candy Perfume Boy, worked with us for a while. Ezra Lloyd Jackson is a perfumer that we trained. Marianne Martin, who is the past president of the British Society of Perfumers, worked with us for a while. and still does on a kind of ad hoc basis. And then we're just training a new compounder and things like that. So we've been going for 8 years, and our sort of the reason that we got together was that Pia and I both left our jobs at around the same time and started doing a lot of freelance work, and then started getting approached for a lot of the same gigs effectively.
Right.
So those might be things like writing about a product, they might have been doing some training, they might have been some range evaluation, um, consultancy for people within brands within the trade, manufacturers within the trade, all of those kind of things. And we'd had we'd she'd interviewed me for Perfumer and Flavorist about my role as an evaluator. And after that interview, we were just kind of talking about what our plans were, and we were going to do these this freelance gig and sort of blah blah blah, and then just kind of jokingly said to one another, maybe one day we'll start a business, ha ha ha. And then 3 months later, we had to start a business because we kept getting approached by all these same clients that needed both of us, or one of us, maybe slightly more than the other, or whatever. But it basically got to a point where we realized that we offered something unique, and together we had a lot of shared skills and overlap, but then complementary skills and overlap as well. So Pia is a perfumer, I am an evaluator and quite experienced in developing sort of very well performing products and across kind of fragrance categories. Pia's experience in perfumery across fragrance categories, but we both have worked in training before. We've both written about fragrance for years and can write about product and copy and all of those kind of things. So we kind of felt like quite a natural fit. And so our kind of mission is that. Like, we never sort of sat down and were like, what's our mission statement? Let's change the world or something. No.
For once, somebody's not just trying to change the world. Let's keep it a little simple and
I mean, but what's kind of quite funny about what's happening with us is that we're working on some projects that will have that kind of impact and change, but so behind the scenes, no one will ever know it was us. And I quite like that.
I like that too. I will tell you, I like that because and I very seldom steer into the political because you know that it's just madness right now. Like it's people barking on eggshells on anything that they say. But what I will say is this: that I think that it's important to understand the authenticity behind one's actions. Just doing it because you really want to do it, it doesn't matter if you're telling the rest of the world that you're doing it.
Exactly.
You're doing it, right? So I think that's great.
I mean, we're both really, like, one of our sort of key shared passions is that we want to get real information out there to people, because there is so much like nonsense mirrors in this trade.
Right.
80s marketing techniques that are still being employed and used by a lot of brands and organizations within the fragrance trade, and they're kind of perpetuating this outdated mythology, this outdated way of talking about fragrance to people, to consumers, right, who just don't know any different, because that's how people talk about perfume. And so we're kind of like quietly trying to change that and move it forward and change the way that people, brands communicate about their fragrances, and fragranced products of all kinds, because let's not pretend that fragrance, the industry, is completely perpetuated just by perfume. No. The fragrance trade makes most of its money on things like detergent and functional perfumery, which is
in the household supplies. That whole aisle.
Our whole lives are scented. Perfumers have their hands in sort of every kind of product category. And so if you can change the way that people start to think about and talk about very mundane products, maybe that will start to lead to a different kind of appreciation of their sense of smell, of the products that they're using otherwise, of actual perfumes and things like that. So it's one of those things where you can't start at the kind of pinnacle of perfumery, which people think of as fine fragrance, right? And then be like, we're going to make all the change if we just work here. No. You're going to have to work across the spectrum of what's fragranced and how people talk about and brands talk about and communicate about those products, because it's important, and it will start to build the olfactory culture, so that there is more language and discussion and ability to talk about and appreciate fine fragrance or perfumes. Like it has to be thought about at every touch point and level. And we're really, really passionate about putting out factual information almost to a fault, because we will fact check and fact check and fact check and fact check and then not put anything out because we're so determined to be right about things, and make sure that the information that is out there is correct. And of course there's so much like just nonsense out there and myth busting to be done, which is a thankless and payless task. Like I see science communicators like Lab Muffin Science and Lab Muffin Beauty, I can't remember what the handle is, but Michelle, and the Eco Well and people like that, and they're doing amazing work. But the problem is, it's an uphill and constant battle to fight misinformation in this this sort of sector.
I know,
and it always will be. So we want to get to a point where you don't have to have the uphill battle. But who knows? But yeah, that's what we're sort of like really passionate about, and that's kind of our long-term mission, is improve the way that people talk about and discuss fragrance and have more factual and real information about what fragrance even is.
Could you give some examples that are what you consider to be the more outdated modes that are still in use, that have been in use for 40, 45 years or more? And
sure,
because that can open a great discourse, and I would.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the one thing that kind of just drives me bonkers is notes lists as the be all and end all and pinnacle of fragrance marketing discussion and criticism, because quite frequently you will see people who have at some point internalized the idea that notes lists are in fact ingredients lists.
Oh goodness.
And this is a much broader phenomenon than we want to admit to ourselves. Like this is everywhere, this is all the time. It comes from people at all levels in the trade and then at all levels in the public, right? Because I'm constantly battling against this notes is the only way to talk about perfume or fragrance mentality. It isn't, and it also isn't super relevant. Like there's no point having a fragrance pyramid for, say, a washing detergent, but that's still how people want to be marketed it and told about the sort of structure of it. It's not. That's not how people experience it. That's not what it is, and so on. And so it's that bugs me no end. And I think that I'm never going to get over it until we abolish the concept of them entirely. And the challenging thing is, we have a brand, we have products that we talk about, and retailers, journalists, blah blah blah, expect a notes list. So when we put out information without it, we then got, where is it? I need it. I need information. You don't. You don't. But then it became such a sort of like cacophony of where is it? And then you have to kind of do it. And it's like, this is frustration, because a notes list, it's not even the same as naming, say, the pigments that are used in a painting.
Oh, it's not the same thing.
It's not even the same as that, which is also useless information.
Right. You don't get that, if you purchase a painting, here's, and there was an alizarin crimson, a phthalo blue.
There's that whole sort of, because you go to a museum, you see a painting on the wall and it says, oh, oil on canvas or whatever it says. And it's kind of like, okay, does that actually tell me anything about the painting really, apart from the actual physical materials that are in it? No. Does it tell me about what it's trying to convey? No. Does it tell me about the sort of like feelings that I'm going to experience when I look at this thing? No. Like this, and this is the sort of frustration and struggle I have with this notes list concept, because I feel like it's effectively, at best, a sort of verbal mood board of what a perfumer is trying to get across when they're creating. It is, I mean, I have to, as part of my job as an evaluator, write notes lists for our clients who request notes lists, because everyone requests notes lists no matter what, right? It's just, this is the way it's done and this is the way it has to be. And that's the mentality, and it's going to take an seismic shift in order to change that, like properly. We're gonna have to move seismic plates in order in order to change that mentality. But me creating a notes list is often, I'll look at the formula, I'll talk to Pia, and we'll go, okay, so we're trying to think about maybe there was the white floral sea that we're talking about with these materials, this. Here are some effects that we're trying to get across. That's a notes list. It's not, here are all the ingredients in your perfume. It's not where they're weighted, like in terms of how impactful they are in the formula. Because you see a pyramid and we talk about top note, mid note, base note, blah, blah, blah. But does that tell you in any way where it's dosed or how it's dosed or what is the most sort of like standout notes and all of those kind of things? And
well, I have a lot to say about it as well, as somebody who's been doing reviews for a while. And I've even noticed how my writing has evolved over time. Like I've changed in the way that I'm reliant on the notes pyramid. Early on, I thought that was the focal point. That was like, and I've learned to see it as more just sort of like an ancillary guide rather than the starting point. It's like, it's there and I can compare my notes to it. But early on, it was sort of a crutch as a writer, because I was trying to figure out if what I was smelling is what was listed in the notes pyramid. And some interesting observations that I made over time is that many of the notes that are listed, it's fascinating to me that the notes are listed. Certain notes that are listed are really there just to support yet another note that is listed. Like take for example, if you see an iris in an iris fragrance, the notes pyramid, and then carrot seed appears, as if carrot seed is just has its own, it's a supporting cast member. But to me, most of the time when the carrot seed is there, it really is just sort of immersed itself into the iris accord.
It's part of the accord. It's there as a kind of almost like technical ingredient or decoration of the accord. It's not there, hi, you should smell me, I'm a carrot seed. Like, and this is one of the sort of challenges that comes across in it, is how not necessarily honest, but intellectually honest are notes lists as a thing, right? Because if you're like, well, we need to call out some naturals that we've put in this fragrance because the clients requested naturals, like it's
because that gives it more credibility that there are
when actually it's kind of provenance is almost meaningless unless you're actually talking about a decent quantity of that material and then a specific cultivar, or like it's grown in a specific place, and actually you can tell that because it's really clear in the fragrance. Like the different cedarwood qualities, you can tell the different vetiver, like not qualities, but like locations, there are differences in the odor. And if something is a Javan vetiver versus a Haitian vetiver, it is going to have a different character, and so on. Like one's going to be smokier, one's going to be slightly more grapefruity, one's going to be slightly more peanutty, all of those kind of things. That's relevant and that's interesting, but only if that's kind of the focus of the fragrance.
If it is a vetiver centric fragrance. If
but
you have vetiver that's just forming the base of a chypre, and there may be like a dash of it in there to kind of bolster the mossy accord, or to pair it up with a patchouli. It really isn't
just in general.
And
then it's like, is it a note or is it just woods? Like, is that what you want to say? And is that then not descriptive enough? And why is that not descriptive enough? And all of those kind of things. Like, it's, I could be angry about this for a long time.
Oh, no, it's understandable. It's understandable because it's sort of gussying up something needlessly to make it seem like something that it shouldn't be made out to be, if that makes sense. It's like the exoticizing of it, like, the Valencia orange from such an, and it's like, and then sometimes I can't help but to feel like, really the orange was just in there to boost the bergamot. Like, is it really that important?
No.
It's not an orange forward fragrance. And it's like with every single note in the note pyramid. And there was one that was bizarre. And there's a lot of bizarre releases out there. I mean, you have these, a lot of these new houses coming out. They're supposed to be niche brands, but there's some other agenda. You can't quite put your finger on it, but it's kind of corrupt. But I didn't say that. I didn't say anything. No, but
didn't.
A venture capitalist kind of thing that happens, or just like a brand that is, that the integrity of perfume as an industry and as a means of, I mean, I'm not going to blow smoke up the ass of the perfume industry because I know that there's a lot of problems with it as well. But that there are some brands that come out where they are really looking for making the money, and it just it just emanates from every pore of the product. And there was like one of them, I can't recall where the brand was from, but they mentioned that it was labdanum from Dominican Republic, and I looked everywhere online for labdanum that is grown in the Dominican Republic, and I couldn't find anything. I had never known it to be a place where there was a where labdanum is.
It's not to say it couldn't grow there or be commercially grown there, but it's a very Mediterranean plant. Like,
it just seems a bit strange that it was and it was like this for every note. Labdanum from Dominican Republic and such from some other exotic in quotes, because of course exotic is another problem in itself, but from another country that, oh gee, I never realized that there was an industry for, I mean, there was actually, I see that a lot, and it makes me wonder if it's just a lot of embellishing to make the product seem more luxurious and much more of a a desirable hedonistic kind of item than it really actually is. There's a lot of it, and it bugs me.
An awful lot of it, and I think it's the kind of like fetishistic exoticism of things, just being like, oh, it's from this faraway land, and that's part of the kind of Francocentric and colonialist mindset that's really dominated fragrance for so long.
And I know there might be arguments as to that whole debate of colonialism versus decolonization and stuff. We won't talk about that. I don't want to alienate the audience. We all have different opinions on that. But with perfume, it's kind of like hard to ignore. It's really hard to ignore that aspect of it.
Like, it's really difficult because obviously a lot of raw materials are grown in places that are former colonies, and the reason that they're there, the materials are even there in the first place, is because it's a former colony, not because it was native to that place. So you have to really sort of like, I think it's only right to kind of like broach and appreciate that not everything is. Vanilla didn't end up in Madagascar by accident.
I was thinking of Madagascar as a perfect example of that.
It's not from there.
Yep.
It didn't end up there by accident. Anyway, a
lot of people don't realize that it is from North America. It's originally from Mexico, the Aztecs.
Really. Yeah, exactly. And so that's also something that bugs me as part of the kind of like 80s mentality of we have to sort of like fetishize and exoticize these things, because I feel like it's still related back to things like opium and the sort of like Orientalist fantasies and all of that kind of stuff.
Oh goodness, like the commercials are a hoot.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So I feel like it's still a sort of hangover of that mentality and that marketing sort of speak and spiel from the 80s, and
I think if we could do a shift away from that because it is getting really tired and really kind of,
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and to think about think in terms of, I really do like when there are houses, as long as like they are being truthful,
Mm,
perfume brands and houses that are transparent about the partnerships that they make with the
yeah.
growers and those who are, with the origins of the materials, and having these sustainable partnerships and actually supporting the communities that are
Mm,
involved. That's really meaningful to me. So I like seeing things like that, as long as like I know it's honest, and hopefully there aren't too many that are creating these,
yeah.
falsehoods about that, because that would be really like
That would really suck
unethical.
if that were not the case. I mean, what I think one of the things I think it's like, obviously, have heard of Monique Remy, so Laboratoire Monique Remy, LMR.
Mhm.
Yeah. So her mentality of if it's good for the growers, it's good for us as
Mhm.
the sellers of this then thing, right?
Mm.
That was the kind of mentality, and I think that's really permeated through a lot of the industry.
Mm.
Of course, there's still going to be sort of like exploitative practices that happen in some places, and maybe it's not kind of as equitable as it should be in some places, but it's moved much further along than it ever was.
Mhm. Mhm.
But that mentality, I feel like, is a real thing. It's a real approach in, especially how the big boys are playing with actually sourcing their naturals and stuff. It's actually they're doing better than they have to,
Mm.
which is a horrible metric, isn't it? It's like, well, it's better than they have to, but
Right. It's like they're actually doing it the right way, so it's better
yeah,
than they, yeah.
right, because
Right.
they could be real like capitalist pigs about it
Yeah.
and absolutely take the absolute mick out of
It
everybody.
it it just it just outlines just how low the standards tend to be.
I know, well, just for just the world in general, like,
Right,
because
right, right,
yeah.
right. Yeah, yeah. But that's good to know. That's good
Mm,
to know. And it's promising, and that's those are the stories that I love to hear,
yeah.
how, because for all this talk about what's happening here in the Western world, and I mean, it can be dizzying, like, but when I know that what we're doing outside of the Western world, or that we're really caring about those who are doing what is really the hard work.
Hmm.
It is really the hardest work. I mean,
Yeah.
one thing that is really elucidating in that respect are the Naturals notebooks, where
Mm,
you really read about the origins of these materials and the amount of labor that's involved.
yeah.
And some of it isn't necessarily all that pleasant,
It
but there
certainly
is
isn't.
this
And it's tough work.
tough, but you
Yeah.
see like this incredible work ethic, and
Yeah.
you see that these communities are so reliant that it really shifts your whole attitude
Hmm.
towards, even as somebody as a perfume hobbyist,
Yeah.
when you open up yourself to what goes beyond what ends up in the bottles that you consume.
Yeah.
It just changes everything, and it makes you much more appreciative, like with
Right.
that end product,
Because, people from all over the world have had a hand in making this bottle of
Yeah.
perfume that sits on your shelf. That's absurd, isn't it, really? It's not, there's not just like one little factory where it's all happened.
Yeah.
It's in fact because perfumery is a global trade, and it always has been, such
Hmm.
as the nature of the sort of like the plants that we use and the chemicals that are produced and all kinds of things. There's
Mm.
so many people involved in getting that to your shelf, to your
Hmm.
hand. It's kind of like mind blowing to think about, really,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
then it makes the scale of it. It's that same thing of kind of like realizing how small we are in the scale of the universe.
Right.
You're just like, oh my god, this is actually much bigger than I ever anticipated. Like how many people were out there that actually had their hands on the roses that were picked that ended up in this pot? You know what I mean? Like, it's
Yes.
absurd. And also the skill and talent that takes, because I went rose picking once in a in a centifolia rose field in
Mhm.
Grass, and I was like, I am butchering this. And
Uh-huh.
the pickers, the people that were doing it day in day out, were just like, completely like clearing off all the heads in like no time whatsoever. I'm like picking 2 at the same pace that they've picked 25 or something.
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah,
picking them as well, or as effectively, or as cleanly. And you think, wow, it's like there's no such thing anywhere as unskilled labor.
yeah. No, it's
You know?
true. It's true. Oh, the idea of saying unskilled labor.
I know.
Labor in itself involves
Yeah.
skill.
Yeah.
How do we how do we define like that really begs a question of defining skill. Like
Yeah, I
it
think
doesn't need to be skill in this much more heady intellectual space. I mean, there's something to be said about examining what it means to be intellectual
yeah.
too. I mean, we can go off on a huge tangent about that as
We
well.
could, and it's very tempting to.
Very tempting.
So
But that means you'd
it
have to
is.
come back and we can devote
Yeah.
another live stream to that, because I think these hierarchies of what is considered valuable skill, it's like,
Yeah, and
ooh,
every job that is a job needs to be done, and therefore
right.
everyone should be
And there's such
appreciated.
value.
Yeah.
That's why I get frustrated when there's this belief that somebody who cleans, they're deserving of much more. But how do we decide that on a person if somebody who is cleaning deserves more? We have to ask ourselves that question. Why do we have this system of what is considered superior and
Yeah.
more invaluable? If we could see that those who do our cleaning and do the more hands-on labor have just as much value in our society, that they deserve a lot more recognition and
Absolutely. Well, I would in some cases argue they've got more value than some sort of like CEOs or whoever. You know what I mean?
Mhm,
Like there's for
mhm.
sure.
Yeah. So
I'm not gonna. I'm gonna try really hard not to go like.
I know, and I have to be careful too, because not all of my opinions are part of the chorus too. So sometimes I might say something, and part of the chorus is like, no,
Can't
we
say
have to
that.
agree with everything that we believe in. Like, so that's why I try to avoid it. But I believe in those things because I think that the real backbone of society are those that have these valuable skills.
Yeah.
And then when we know that those in this global society with these skills are the invaluable contributors to the final product, and in this case
Mm-hmm.
perfume,
Yeah.
then of course people say that this is a very foofy kind of, it's not that it's just some sort of non-essential luxury,
Yeah.
but that's part of we need those things in life because that's part of culture. So to
Right.
know that this piece of culture involves all of these moving parts and all of these people can
Mhm.
maybe make us feel a little bit better about contributing to it. But
Yeah.
that depends on whether or not those who are providing the product are doing it in an ethical and principled
Right.
way.
And
Yeah.
are they? Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it's definitely important to highlight that. And I've thought about having more discussions about that as well,
Hmm.
in light of just looking at how much is involved. So speaking of these materials, though, I know that you don't work with all of the different perfume materials.
Hmm.
But are there some in particular that stand out to you as those that you love the most? We already know Iris,
Yeah.
so maybe Orris Rude and anything involved in that. But what are some of the others that you're most fond of?
Well, okay. So the list starts to get long, um, but there is a. Okay. Let's let's let me like tick off the naturals so that I feel like I've done the happy thing. Obviously, iris, incense, frankincense in almost any of its forms. So the resin, the CO2 extract, the essential oil, love them all. Even isobornyl acetate, which is a sort of like, I don't want to say it's a fraction, but it's like part of the smell of frankincense resin. But that material on its own, I'm obsessed with it. I think it's dirt cheap. It is kind of so ubiquitous in sort of certain kind of perfumery. Like if you're doing home fragrance, candle fragrances, it works really well in a candle, for example. So it's in a lot of cheaper candles, but I love the smell of it. I think it's fabulous. It's this kind of like weird, it's like the piney, bright, fresh part of incense resin.
Right. It's all the if I always use music analogies, it's all
Yeah.
treble. It's the
Yeah,
treble.
yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
all up there.
Love
And
that.
it's so sort of it's shrill and it's abrasive and I don't care. I love it.
I love shrill and abrasive. Love it. Many different
If
ways.
Fran Drescher was a
Yeah.
perfumery ingredient. So yeah, I love incense and kind of all the related materials. I am particularly fond of anything vaguely grapefruity. So even things like the other day I posted on my Instagram story about smelling oxane for the first time.
Oh, yes.
And oxane neat or in sort of 50% tech dilution, which is how you really get it, smells a lot like a fart in a rubber balloon. But when it's diluted down to like 1% or 0.5%, it smells grapefruity and fabulous. And I just love anything that has that kind of slightly sulfuric sharpness that grapefruit has.
Yeah. So I'm thinking like also like rhubarb is adjacent.
Yeah, rhubarb actually like styryl acetate. Love that stuff. It smells like
passion fruit, tropathiane.
Yeah,
I think is the name of it. Oh goodness gracious.
Yeah. And then there's I don't know if you ever have you ever smelled Timut or Timur pepper?
Timur pepper, yes.
It's amazing. Like hot grapefruit. I absolutely love that. And if I had my way, I would just tell Pia to put it in absolutely everything that she's creating, even if it has no place in it. That's one of the things, as I was talking about earlier, I need to like refrain from doing. Do you know what this really needs? Loads of Timur pepper. So I love that. We have this really fabulous decolorized green tea extract.
Oh, nice.
Which is somewhere in the sort of realm of, it's like a jasmine tea, matcha kind of thing. I'm obsessed with that. There's a material called canthoxal, which is a sort of anisic.
Yeah, kind of like licoricey anisic.
I love it. I love it because it has none of the hot side of anise, and it has all of the sort of like sweet and bittersweet side of the licorice, which I hate to eat, but like the smell of.
A lot of people would agree with you on that. I like to eat and smell it.
Yeah.
But what I like about that material, it is sort of like all the back notes, like the woody sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fab. It's fab, and it works really nice with vanilla kind of materials and stuff like that. I really love that. And what else? Oh, there's a material. Wait, it's fine. I could talk about it. No, I was wondering, like, if I'd smelled something as a captive that I wasn't allowed to talk about, but that's okay.
Be careful.
There's a material which is called Floral Super.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is a wonderful floralizer. I think on it's not. I don't think it's particularly sort of like an interesting smell, but I love what it does to things. Like it suddenly makes things feel things. Sorry, I went Bristolian. It makes things smell real. It makes them smell like they're an actual blooming flower, which is quite remarkable because you can use it in these completely sort of like synthetic compositions, and then suddenly it's like, ooh, it's real now. So I love that. I love rose oxide.
Me too.
I just love the kind of like raspy metallic rosiness. Like I think it's just fabulous. It smells like really long red nails to me. Like that's the smell.
Pointy red,
sharp talons. Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of Grace Jones a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah. Like I totally get that. Like vamping, very vamping. Yeah.
I actually was discussing it a bit. I did so I do this notes and accords series, and I did rose for the last one, and I did mention rose oxide, and I love the fact that it does kind of have that, like, it just provides that razor's edge of the rose. It's sort of like that highest pitch, metallic, sharp kind of part of the rose, and it's interesting how it really stands out in certain
Yeah,
perfumes to great effect. So that's
yeah,
another excellent one.
yeah, I
Yeah.
love that. And also cyclamen-aldehyde, which I
Mm-hmm.
just think is really cool because it
Yeah,
smells cold.
it
I
does.
can't really explain it, as it smells cold, and it's not it's not, it's not menthol, but it smells cold. It smells like snowy flowers. I don't know. It's really
Yeah.
bizarre, and really fabulous. And it also kind of has this wonderful clean association in my mind.
It's almost waxy, but not quite. It's like,
Yeah, it's not the
yeah,
kind of aliphatic side that aldehydes typically have.
it's
It's
more
there, but not at the
like
same
the
time.
if you think of like certain in botany, certain flower plants that
Yeah,
have a waxy layer
yeah,
versus candle wax, and they give off that certain aroma. And I have experienced fragrant cyclamen, and
yeah.
it's pretty amazing that the
It
cyclamen
is
aldehyde
wonderful.
really does smell like the scent of fragrant cyclamen,
Yeah.
which you never run across here in the US because most of the ones in the supermarkets have been completely bred out of any scent whatsoever.
Yeah,
Occasionally, the
it's
white
just
ones do, but
everything's for aesthetic, isn't it?
yeah. Oh
The
goodness,
flowers, the flower
big
wreath,
and bold and
everything,
bright at the
everything.
expense of everything else. Yeah.
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 Yes, and what else, what else, what else? I mean, vetiver, I like vetiver, yeah, it's easy.
Oh, of course, you can't go wrong with vetiver. And vetiver was one of the first ones that fascinated me. I was like, "What is this? What is this vetiver?" I
Yeah.
remember going into there is this tobacconist, a tobacco shop in Harvard Square, and that's
Mm,
where I first learned of the Galant masculines. That's where I first bought Habit Rouge years ago, and of course, vetiver
yeah,
was right next to it. And that was the first vetiver I experienced, and I was obsessed with vetiver. I got vetiver extraordinaire,
yeah.
and then I got the original vetiver from Creed, and then I was confused, like, what kind of vetiver is this? And then it turned out, as I learned more about vetiver, it really had very little to do with vetiver, but
Yeah,
that's
I
a
know,
whole other
it's an odd
story.
name for a fragrance that just smells like soap, like
Like, what?
yeah. Like, if they called it vetiver soap, I would absolutely believe that that's what
Yeah,
like,
vetiver.
fine.
Yeah,
I would be like, "Yeah, okay, that's a soap that smells vaguely of vetiver."
and they
I would
could have made it sound fancy,
yeah.
but you named it a French name,
Oh, yes,
savon,
savon
savon,
savon de
savon
vetiver.
de vetiver, and then all of a sudden it would sound,
Yeah,
more fancy. Vetiver soap.
fancier, yeah. But vetiver was as well, like, one of the first notes I really learned to distinguish, because I never smelled the material back in the sort of retail days,
Yeah.
but I remember smelling a whole bunch of fragrances along the counter because I was kind of doing this exercise to myself when it was quiet and I'd done all the cleaning and stocked everything up and it was all fine. I would be like, okay, I'm just going to smell a bunch of things and kind of commit them to memory. And that was vetiver was one of those things that I'd kind of like, this is the pattern that I'm starting to recognize, like this part of this fragrance and this part of this fragrance and this part of this fragrance. It's all the same. Okay, what is that? And then I would go home and Google them and be like, oh, they've all got vetiver in. I wonder if that's. And then I would smell more things and recognize the pattern again and so on. And that was one of the first ones I kind of trained myself to recognize. So I
Yeah.
think it's got it's like soft spot for me.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Because I think with vetiver, if you're really in the normie world,
Yeah.
vetiver doesn't really come up as like I was able to immediately recognize patchouli because of its cultural
Yes.
impact. So I was like, okay, I can identify that right away. And but then the things like vetiver, and then
Yeah.
forget about labdanum was like a religious experience for me. Smelling
I
labdanum, oh my god,
love laudanum.
smelling that pure. I was like, I can't believe that a plant would have such a sensuous and animal-like and
Yeah.
warm and sweet and
There was
unmentionable kind of
I
characteristics.
know, it's just so naughty. The I remember I don't know where I was. It was a rock garden somewhere, and that was my first encounter with a rock rose, which is the labdanum plant. And I remember sort of like going, "What is that smell that I can kind of pick up somewhere?"
Mm,
And that was long before I'd kind of like registered what labdanum was,
mm.
but the smell stuck in
Yeah.
my brain.
Yeah, because when I
Because
smelled it
then
on
I
a
was like, "Oh, it's," and then when I finally smelled the raw material, I was like,
right.
"Oh, it's that plant in that place."
Yeah.
And kind of went do, 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 do. And sort of
Something
like,
similar happened with me, but the only difference is I couldn't pinpoint where I smelled it before. I just knew that I did. I knew I
yeah,
did.
yeah, yeah,
Somewhere in the ether, I
yeah.
had smelled it many times before. And Rock Rose, that reminds me of Clive Christian deciding to name one of their fragrance Rock Rose. And if you want a bit of a giggle, just read the reviews on Rock Rose and how people are desperately trying to find Rose in Rock Rose. Like, this is my favorite rose perfume. Oh, love the rose in Rock Rose.
And
Like,
it's a labdanum,
it's a labdanum. It's a labdanum all the way.
of
Yeah,
course. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
The
yeah.
power of suggestion, though,
It's a
because
powerful suggestion, and honestly, as much as it's humorous and you can laugh, you can't really blame the people who are not familiar because
no,
they're trying to make sense of the name. So if they're
yeah,
reading a rock, it's almost you're absolutely right. The power of suggestion, where you can be convinced that
yeah,
you're picking up something that isn't actually
yeah,
there. But when you do actually smell Clive Christian Rock Rose, because everybody's racing after Clive Christian to smell those fragrances is so accessible. And
I've not been
smell
to Fortnum's in a while, so I'll have to stop by next time I'm in. I've been across the road from it and then not gone in, but they've got Clive Christian there, so I'll have to do that.
yes. I did smell Rock Rose. It's definitely like an amber, labdanum forward amber.
Okay,
Um,
okay.
Yeah, Clive Christian. I remember Clive Christian was one of those. So early on, when I was getting very much into perfume, this is 16, 17 years ago, I was going into places like
Mhm.
Barney's, New York, and Neiman Marcus, asking myself, why on earth am I in this department store? This is so beyond my salary bracket. But this is the only place where I can smell interesting perfume in my
Yeah,
city. So I'd go in there, and that's how I learned about Creed, and that's how I learned about, oh, God knows what else at the time, all of the really aspirational brands. And Clive
yeah,
Christian was there, and of course the shop assistant, the attendant, um, sales assistant, we say here, said you must smell Clive Christian because they have the most expensive fragrances in the world. Like, they were selling it as because they
yeah.
were the most expensive, therefore they were of the utmost quality. And
Yes.
I remember even then thinking to myself, why is this so much more expensive than the Frederick Malls at Barney's across the hall? Like, I didn't really understand why they were more expensive because
Yeah.
even at the time, to me, I felt like they were quite. I'm going to sound really snotty, pedestrian. They just smelled like more of a high end mainstream than what I was smelling, from the other
Mm.
brands. So,
I mean, I honestly haven't committed any of those fragrances to memory because
yeah.
they're not in my wallet bracket. Like, if there was something that I wanted from it, it's going to cost me an arm and a leg, and I can't deal with it. So I haven't sort of like spent a lot of energy or time on fragrances like that because I'm like, well, that's not accessible to me. So
And just as a rule, I don't collect anything that has a crown for the cap. Like, it's just like.
well, they did buy up Crime Perfumery in order to have
Yeah.
time. So
I think that they had a reputation, the Royal Crown, sometime
yeah,
back.
Royal Crime
Yeah,
Perfumery,
yeah, yeah.
which
Nor do I
I
collect
don't remember.
cupcakes. And what was that?
I don't really remember them existing. I think they were slightly before I was even born in the
Yeah.
UK when they were still famous. So, like, yeah,
And Creed evidently was much earlier than when we were born as well, and our parents as well, and grandparents. Anyhow, we have 7 people tuned in, and this must be a riveting time for them. I think that I think that a lot of people will appreciate this in archived form. Not to
Mhm.
fair, Nick. A lot of people watch it in the archive, especially since depending upon where you are, this is not the ideal time.
This is not most convenient time. Yeah.
So I wanted to I think now's a good time to ask about Boujee Bougies, and I have not had the pleasure of sampling them yet, but I'm very appreciative of your willingness to help me out with that. So tell us a little bit about how this particular project started.
Well, as ridiculous as it sounds, quite literally, I dreamed the name of the brand. I thought it was, I went to work and I told Pia about it. I was like, I dreamed we had a candle brand and it was called Boujee Bougies because it means fancy candles. And I thought it was so funny that I had to tell her about it. And then she was like, yeah, okay, let's do it. And I was like, oh, okay, that's not actually what I was expecting. But because we discussed kind of at some point starting a brand. I think for a lot of people that knew us when we started working together, assumed that we would launch a perfume brand almost immediately. But that's not what we kind of wanted to do. We were quite happy to work on fragrances for other people and build up what we were doing as Olfiction. And so Boujee Bougies came about as a kind of, we had some ideas that we really wanted to play with that didn't ever fit in spaces that anyone else was working in for it. Like, or any of our clients weren't kind of going in those directions or whatever. It was all fine. Like we'd had this kind of discussion of like, oh yeah, let's do it. And then it was like, okay, so what is it we're doing? And so initially it was going to be just a candle brand to start with. And that's where we were. So Pia had worked on quite literally hundreds of candle formulations by the time we decided to do it. So we knew that we knew how to work in that medium. And also we thought we're being a tiny bit subversive of people's expectations of us, because thinking, oh yeah, they'll just put out perfumes. So like, aha, no, we're gonna do the unexpected because we can't help ourselves. So we approached the kind of the sort of perfumery side of things in candles, and we wanted to really put kind of niche quality, in inverted commas, into a candle. So we wanted them to smell like you were buying a niche perfume. You were buying a sort of like a fragrance that had a story to tell in a candle format. And kind of expressed it well. And so that's what we set out to do. And we created the first 5, which were Succulent, which was based on this amazing cactus accord that Pia had created initially for a fine fragrance project that kind of didn't end up going anywhere. But I was like, we need to do something with this cactus accord. And I think you could really make this work in a candle. So that became Succulent. With a lot of work and development to kind of make it perform properly in wax and all of those kind of considerations. Then I had like the idea for gilt. I thought it was quite fun to play with the idea of gilt as in golden, and incense and that sensation, and obviously all the sort of like golden things that one might find in a church or in a cathedral. And that whole idea of the smell of the inside of a church and a cathedral after they burned the liturgical incense and all of that. Like, I love that smell. I'm not religious in any way, but that smell is transportative and it is spiritual to me in some way, even though I didn't grow up experiencing it that way. You know?
Me neither. I didn't. This is a whole side story, and I won't get sidetracked, but my mother did convert to Catholicism for some odd reason in her 40s, but that's another story for another time. But I wasn't raised in the Catholic Church. By that point, I was already 17, 18 years old.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to
sort of miss that phase then.
Missed that phase, exactly. There were numerous churches throughout my childhood, and then it just culminated, of course, naturally with Catholicism. So, but she ended up reforming herself from absolutely everything later on in life, which is a liberating thing for her and for me. So as I said, a whole other story, but I didn't I wasn't exposed to that. So maybe that's why I'm so divorced from any kind of negative association. To me,
Yeah,
it's like
exactly.
so, yeah.
Because something that used to happen to me when I was in retail was some people would smell some incensey fragrance, like the original Gucci, the Gucci Pour Homme that was like the brown liquid with black cap.
Yes.
That smells very churchy, and I would sometimes spray that back in the Boots days, and people would be like, oh, "Smells like church! Oh God!" and like freak out. And I remember someone quite literally running away from me at Les Santeurs when I sprayed Cardinal by Healy, which
Oh,
really is church,
wow.
going, "Oh my God, no, Catholic, no, get out!" Like, I'm just kind of guilt.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
they went into a full, "Oh God," guilt spiral.
Right.
And
Right.
so I thought that it's kind of funny to play with the name. Um, based on that kind of reaction. And then we were speaking about queer culture, which is a play, obviously, on queer culture, queer leather.
I love the very
We enjoy a pun.
yes.
And so we did like just kind of a sexy leather in a library because we wanted to kind of play on the culture and the queer leather part. So that's what we did. Queen Jam, which was Pia's childhood jam, Cutting Up the Hilo, the Finnish jam.
Yeah.
Which is raspberries, bilberries, put together with kind of some rosiness and so on. So that's quite sort of like sweet, jammy, sort of candle fragrance. And then Hellflower was our other one of the original 5, which I'd found this sci-fi book. I love sci-fi. You can kind of probably see the Mars Attacks poster behind me.
I was gonna note. I was trying to find the right opportunity to point that out. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm big sci-fi geek. Anyway, we found this book. It was called Hellflower. It sounded really clever and interesting in the blurb. But then if you actually read the book of everybody who was apparently addicted to hellflowers, at no point did they tell you what the smell was. So they were all addicted to the smell of hellflowers, but no one knew what they smelled like. No one bothered to describe that. So we fantasized about what it might smell like. And
you filled that void. You were able to.
Exactly.
It's sort of like fan fiction, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Olfactive fan fiction.
Ah,
exactly.
yes. Tom says, looking forward to sampling this house. Is it available in the US? Inquiring minds want to know.
Inquiring minds want to know. Not yet. We're working on it. We've got a commercial director who we're working with to get the brand into the States. We've had some interest from Exxon's Just, and some retailers have expressed interest, but then it's slow. It's slow. All these conversations take time. So I don't know. Pressure people, pressure retailers to take us. So we started out then with the candles, and very sort of quickly it came to realization that people wanted to wear our candles. Because we put perfumes in candle form effectively. And so we decided, okay, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it properly. And we are going to reimagine some of the concepts even, and then create fragrances from those reimagined concepts. So we took like the key theme of 4 of them to start with, which were our Gilded, which was sort of inspired by Guilt, but not really, because actually it's quite a significant move away from being in church, because in our minds now it's this, I don't know if you ever watched Deep Space Nine.
A bit, back in the day, yeah.
You know the Bajoran wormhole is called the Celestial Temple. And this, to me, I was like, there was this golden light that sort of like came over when the aliens from the wormhole came out. And I wanted to kind of capture that feeling of golden light in an imaginary celestial temple, right? Like if there was spirituality in outer space, how would it smell? So that was kind of our inspiration for Gilded. And we wanted this feeling of golden light, of sort of luminous, bright light, metallic gold, and effectively like frankincense that had been completely covered in gold or transmuted into gold. Like that was our sort of starting point and inspiration for it. And the fragrance itself is very sort of like spacey, open space and airy, and it's got this kind of like aldehydic saffron thing going on, all of the incenses and so on. So it's fun, and it really expresses the golden light theme, as far as I'm concerned, really well. Then with the succulent, we transmuted that into verdant, which is a key part of that accord is in the top note of the fragrance, but then it's a whole structure that we've created under that. So there's basically this whole concept of skyscrapers covered in green. We wanted to feel like, a lot of people say, oh, The Last of Us, which is like that futurist TV show where humans are gone, the plants have taken over. The world's a better place. So we kind of wanted to think about like hope and new life coming forwards, and all of this kind of like green. So there's like misty green air, there's vines, there's sappy leaves, there's kind of fruits and sort of like muskiness, and then salty, almost concrete effects in the base as well, which is like, actually, it's, if you looked at the formula, you'd think it were a vetiver perfume, but it's not a vetiver perfume. That, as we were saying earlier, because there's quite a significant dose of vetiver in there, but it's not kind of the thing that you're smelling. It's the structure of the whole thing. It's like the backbone. And then we did Queen, which was to play with the jam accord from the candle and sort of insert that into a scene. So that's inspired by Alice Through the Looking Glass.
Yes.
And there's a particular scene after Alice has made the queen. She's at the tea party again with the Hatter, the White Queen, the Red Queen, and everyone's pissing her off. Basically, they're asking a lot from her. She has a hissy fit, and she throws everything into the air. And that's what we wanted to capture, this kind of like absolute wildness of tea being spilled, of jam tarts going everywhere, but also this kind of idea of sort of futurist Victoriana. So we've kind of got this very, very classic rose violet combination that's happening, but then at the same time there's this like neon brightness that's happening because of some of the other materials we've used in there. Slightly sort of like mushroomy effect in the base as well. We wanted to have that feeling of the caterpillar on the mushroom, and obviously Wonderland roses. Like, I don't think you can do a Wonderland concept without rose. Like,
of course, of course.
And it's actually there is that jam accord, but it's part of like a jam tart that's in the air over there.
Yes. Oh, yes. I recall now. It's over yonder. Over yonder.
There. I saw the jam tart. And so this is really fun because it's like, I think it's the most classic of our fragrances in a respect, but it's also quite sort of subversive once you actually wear it. And then we've got Queer, which is our ode to sort of queerness and leather. It's really sexy.
Winning combination. You can't separate the two.
No,
go hand in hand.
We had someone come to our stand at Exons who was from San Francisco, so I could reference a specific fair, and they would know what I was talking about.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
I'm not living under a rock.
No.
I may not partake in such things, but
but you could look on from the sidelines.
Yes, I can appreciate it from the sidelines. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I really wanted like a fucking sexy leather. Like, that's what I wanted when we were briefing it to Pia. It was like, we want this leather accord that you've got in the candle, but like amped up, turned into a whole perfume, like wearable. And that's got this kind of tobacco-y note, which nods back to kind of my early scent memories of like the smell of being in a pub surrounded by cigarette smoke. Like, I grew up in those environments. That's normal to me. And as I grew up and sort of like aged into going out clubbing, it was still legal to smoke in clubs back then. And so in my head, it's all very, very linked. So I wanted that kind of tobacco feeling. But then Pia's interpreted it through her lens of kind of, well, actually, she knew there was this family that she was friends with as a child, and the parents had this like library with leather chairs, and they would always smoke cigars in the library, and it was just like a fascinating place. So it's kind of interesting that she'd kind of idealized this character, like this is the ideal place as an adult to be. And then at the same time, I'm like, ooh, leather that smells like sex. And somehow we've arrived at the same place with both of those ideas. Like they merged actually quite well together in the fragrance.
I love that. They're just coalescing.
Yeah, exactly. It's like taking both of our sort of experiences and worldviews and just going.
That's great.
Yeah.
Color me intrigued. I really look forward to sampling these. Wow.
Well, we'll get them to you. We'll get them to you.
Great.
And then we've just shown Exxon's Inferno, which sorry, but sometimes when I come up with a name, I'm like, how has no one done this before? So we wanted to have this nod to Hellflower. Oh God, sorry, my phone's activated. It thinks I said Siri.
Oh, oops.
Oh my God. He just started flashing at me from under the like, what's going on? Where was I? Inferno, yeah. So we were playing with this Hellflower idea and kind of like reimagining it effectively, going, okay, well, if we're going to do Hellflower the perfume, what would we do? And then we were like, well, we would take the theme and flip it. So Hell and flowers, we thought of Persephone, because obviously of the myth, and she was goddess of both hell and springtime and therefore flowers. And when she came back from the underworld is when everything came back to life. So we thought, wouldn't it be fun to have like this whole concept of Persephone's stepped out of the underworld, she's left Hades behind, she's still got this pyrotechnic trail behind her, but she's bringing with her new life and all of the flowers and fruit coming back to life and all of that kind of stuff merged into one fragrance. So that's really been fun to play with. And so we work very odd on Bougie Bougies stuff. Like we are working on the narrative and the fragrance at the same time. So it will come from, here's an idea, or here's an accord that we're playing with, or whatever. And then, okay, what's the narrative going to be that goes with this? Or I've got this narrative, what's the accord going to be that goes with it? Like we've got the freedom to play with that. Because we've got our own lab, we can do that. You know, we can play around and take our time with it. So it means we refine both at the same time. Like, what is the story we're telling, and what is the fragrance corresponding to that story? And it moves along. So the goalposts might move, but we move with them. And we're setting them ourselves, so it's okay.
That's awesome. Well, I did make sure in the description for the live stream to include the Olfiction site and the Boujee Bougies site. And for those who want, they can purchase directly from the Boujee Bougies site. Who else is carrying it over across the pond?
We're still opening up retailers. It's a long battle. But we're working on it.
I can imagine, but I wish the both of you the best on that. And this is the time where I put my theme music on there. See, I'm the producer. Music. So Nick, thank you so much for joining me as a guest panelist here, and I hope that you can come back again soon, because we had so many other topics that we could have talked about, but we like to keep it a little compact. I think 2 hours is good, even though I mean we could talk about everything under the sun. I can tell. So stick around backstage. Backstage is just when we are offline, and we'll chat a little bit more before your bedtime. And before my supper time. It is
getting near supper time.
PM here. And I just want to let folks who are watching or listening that we will be back in 2 weeks. We will have perfume writer Stephen Matthews. And then I will also be doing a new video pretty soon. And then the next notes and accords will be for Iris and Violet.
Nice.
Yes. Two kindred spirits. They are right next to each other in the family tree. So I'll be doing that for the next notes and accord stream, which will be in 3 weeks. But until then, I wish everybody well, and we will see you all soon. All right, take care. Bye-bye now.